Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ælfric Homily Project. And I wasn't planning on making another one of these extra videos, as I poetically call them. But in preparation for the August homily, which should be on this Assumption of Mary, um, I decided to do a quick video on Lammas, as I felt like it deserved mentioning. I think this will probably be a little shorter than, say, the last one I did on Midsummer. And so what is Lammas? Lammas is a holiday on August 1st, the day this video should come out. And it is one focused on bread, one maybe focused on the Eucharist, I think would be kind of a given. We'll talk about that a little bit. We also have a charm that mentions it, and then, of course, how it falls into this idea of seasons that every video essentially has touched on. So it is literally loaf-mass. That is what Lammas is. It's loaf-mass, which loaf is loaf, as in like loford, which is a contraction of lofward, which is loaf guardian, or like a bread keeper, which is the word lord, right? Or lofdia, which is like a bread doer or a kneader, which is the word for lady. And so we have mass, which often gets attached to like holidays, which would have had a religious connotation, but oftentimes don't so much today. It's still Christmas, right? But they even have secular things. It kind of just means festival. And now most of these festivals in early medieval England would have been Christian, obviously. But loaf-mass, or Lammas, it is in modern English, is on the 1st of August, which is the start of Weed Month. More commonly, the feast of St. Peter vincula, or St. Peter in Chains. Or that of the Maccabees. I'd say the St. Peter ad vincula is probably the more popular holiday for August 1st, rather, in Europe. And here is a image of the old Anglo-Saxon calendar for August, and you can see there's harvesting going on. I would say in modern society, we don't really associate August so much with harvest. But Hlafmasa, or Lammas in modern English, may be named for the first wheat harvest being baked in bread and blessed at Mass. While mentioned in Anglo-Saxon sources, the name, rather, is mentioned in Anglo-Saxon sources, it isn't really explained. It's really just used as a date. Like, this happened at Hlafmas, right? And so it may be an English name for a Welsh or an Irish harvest festival, like Lunasa, which is the same day. It is associated, or rather, is not associated with any Christian festival. It doesn't have any biblical precedent, whether that's New or Old Testament. And there are no harvest festivals at this time on the continent. So we're not entirely sure. There's a lot of ideas about where this comes from. We know the name is English. We know that it seemingly has some Christian context. We're not entirely sure, though, again. So over here is that's the manuscript, Cotton, Tiberius B6. All right, so it is also lately attested, like some things. Like, if you remember in our Christmas video, Christmas is a late attestation. It's normally called midwinter, not even Yule. And so there is, in the 9th century Old English martyrology, maybe the first reference, but it's not Hlafmasa. It is Hlafsinunga, actually, which is more of like loaf blessing, signing, literally, consecration, from Old English senian, which would actually be modern sane as a verb. Though I think that only survives in certain dialects, and which would be Latin signare, which is, of course, related to sign, which is we get from Latin signum, or signum, I guess how we say that in modern English, because it is a word kind of in modern English too. And so the Old English Orosius is actually probably their earliest attestation. Would probably be 9th century as well, but and this is what it says, actually. I went and found the text. Says, that was on Thara Tida Carindus Augustus, and on Tham die they way hateth Hlafmas. That was on the 1st of August, and on the day which we call Lammas. Of course, the calendar August is the 1st of August, as far as Roman calendar is concerned. So Bede never mentions Lammas. You would think he would. And Ælfric actually only mentions it once on a homily for St. Peter ad vincula, and he says "Theye hatat Hlafmasa," which you call Lammas, right? Talking about this day. This is the day that you call loaf-mass, not us, you. So maybe even a distance himself from the secular name for this holiday. So, It may also just be a label given to the beginning of harvest and have nothing to do with any celebration for a particular day. Again, there's a lot of ands. It may this be this, right? So August 7th, though, remember, is the beginning of autumn, or in Old English we call it harvest. And this, of course, holiday also stands between as like a midway marker between the summer solstice, which would be celebrated on June 24th, we talked about in June, and then the autumn equinox, which would be near the end of September. All right, so the only attestation actually in poetry is in the Menologium, which if you want to read the Menologium, it's actually in the C text of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. That manuscript opens with Orosius, and then it goes in the Menologium, and then it has the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And this is the section of it, maybe kind of in the middle, maybe a little further in the middle, but it says, Anthas simnashrith, im selvon nicht thas sumere ye brichted, where monathon tun, where hwar bringeth, Augustus irmen theodum, chlaf masan die, swathas harvest kimt, imba odor swirch butan andre wanam, kuliti wastmum chladen, wela bith ye iwed, sorry, that's a tongue twister for me, fire on foldan. So then always glides away 7 nights, summer brightened, weed month into the dwellings, everywhere brings August to peoples of the earth, Lammas day. So autumn or harvest comes after a week, save 1 day lacking, right? So 6 days after Lammas is the beginning of what the Anglo-Saxons would call, they'd call harvest, right? But what we would call autumn, right? That season of autumn. Again, all right, the seasons don't quite line up with ours, hence why midsummer is actually in the middle of summer in the Anglo-Saxon calendar, but it's the start of summer for us modern folks. So beautiful, laden with fruits, plenty is shown, fair on earth, or revealed, I guess you could say, not just shown. And so, yes, it is a time apparently for everywhere harvest, which is not true actually, but again, this is maybe everywhere in context of English speakers, it would have been true. All right, and then we also have this interesting charm. I'm not going to read it over here for you, but you can note actually once it gets to the charm that actually the charm itself is in Latin, and it doesn't actually have an incipit, and there is no ending either. I have a picture of the manuscript, and the manuscript is rather heavily damaged. You'll be able to see this. But this is actually Eleanor Parker's translation as well, because I'm a little short on time. But take 2 long pieces of 4-edged wood, and on each piece write a paternoster on each side down to the end, and lay one on the floor of the barn, and lay the other across it, so that they form the sign of the cross. And take 4 pieces of the hollowed bread, which is blessed on Lammas day, and crumble them at the 4 corners of the barn. This is the blessing for that, so that mice do not harm these sheaves. Say prayers over the sheaves, and do not cease from saying them. City of Jerusalem, where mice do not live, they cannot have power, and cannot gather the grain, nor rejoice with the harvest. This is the second blessing, Lord God Almighty, who made heaven and earth. Bless these fruits in the name of the Father and the Holy Spirit, amen. And then say a paternoster. So there's a couple things that it's like obviously interesting here. This reminds me of the acrobote, probably the most famous Old English charm. This is obviously very religious. Well, this probably kind of like reeks of folk magic to us modern readers. This would have been considered a religious thing. It probably would have been performed by a priest. And while I guess you could probably call it magic in a sense, again, it is a religious observance. And these charms, in fact, the manuscript that has this has a number of charms, and they're pretty interesting to look at. But this one mentions Lammas, which is why I bring it up. And so this bread association is difficult because again we don't exactly know what it means. Bread is in every one of these masses, right? The Eucharist is bread, and so like maybe there's something particularly special about the Lammas Eucharist, or maybe there's actual loaves from this first harvest being blessed. Maybe it's just the Eucharist, but it's from the first harvest in this case. So it's interesting, like how does this relate in a sense, right? Like because again, the acrobote, for example, is obviously like a charm, but it seems very Christian, has very Christian elements. A Christian would be saying this, not some pagan, right? And so, and you can tell, right, it has the pater noster in there, right? And not a pagan's not going to say this, right? And so it's a very interesting idea, and I think this is maybe the most interesting mention of Lammas that we have, right? This hollowed bread, right? But again, is that just a Eucharist? Is this very particular to Lammas? Again, no one sat down and explained Lammas Day. It's mentioned actually several times later in the Anglo-Saxon period in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, but again, really just as a marker, as like just synonymous with August 1st, like right, like whatever, right? Events that would take place around this date. That's what it would be used as this marker, right? But it doesn't. We don't really get explanations from it. In fact, this charm right here is probably the biggest explanation that we get for it, which again is really not that revealing about what's going on here. So, yeah. Though it is an interesting also of the example of that. Wow, my brain is not working. Of um, wow. I should stop recording these at night, but it's too loud here during the day. So, I've just this multiple languages interacting in the early medieval period of England, just like you see kind of in the Phoenix, right? The very end of the Phoenix poem, which is not relative to Lammas, so I didn't put it in here. But the very end of it is in first half lines in Old English, second half line for the last several lines is in Latin, and it actually follows the metrical rules of English poetry and Latin poetry rather well. And so these people that have this, particularly this priestly caste probably, but having this interactions in the world with the dual language essentially. Here's this is actually the folio that this comes from 15 or so, and yeah, it doesn't look very good. Pretty much actually, if you go look at the manuscript, because this one is digitized at the British Library, you can go and look at it. This is pretty much what the whole thing looks like. It looks really bad, and this would be an interesting one. We haven't looked at any manuscripts like this for the lectures. I'm not sure if I want to. Like, this is really difficult, and I'm not sure of any of the Ælfric homily manuscripts that survive. There's several look this bad, but note that this is why sometimes getting the results from the text really from a medieval manuscript is difficult, because they can look worse than this. All right, and so this is Lammas, though. Definitely the name sticks around, right? I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say it in real life here, but maybe in England someone has. But later in the medieval period, some writers would confuse it with Lammas, and obviously not recognizing the cloth or that lam. It does show up in a few spellings. So maybe like Lammas, for example, with no F in it at all. It would show up even in Old English period. And then that could confuse, of course, with lamb more easily, I think. John Capgrave, he said the Feast of St. Peter, which they call in Latin ad vinculum, in English is La Messa. And then John Lydgate, at the same time period, said Peter's chains were broken in prison, the feast thereof called Lammas. So, and so there's obviously this association that it's the same day. But again, even these don't really tell us anything particular, right? And then here's a novel, actually, if you've read this. I think this is the 4th Codville Chronicles. Does it say on here? Yeah, it does. Okay. And St. Peter's Fair takes place on this day. And I don't remember it ever being called Lammas, actually, in this novel at all. This novel is probably from the 80s. But it takes place during the Anarchy. So very, very fun novels. Feel like little murder mysteries are short. Anarchy is a very fun period. And the main character definitely gets into the mindset of a medieval monk of time and place. He's an ex-crusader, and they're kind of cozy in a sense, besides the fact that they focus on murder. But they're really not that hard to digest, as opposed to like something that has actually a really similar premise, like The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, which has a lot more philosophy and theological thought put into it. Codville is much simpler than that. All right, and this is a fun thing. There's just a couple more slides here, and it never comes, actually. So Eleanor Parker also points out that there's something called latter Lammas. So she says, given the time of year and the huge importance of getting in the harvest, Lammas was a popular date for fairs, as you saw at St. Peter's Fair, and local feasts. It was also one of the regular dates on which rents would be paid, debts settled, contracts made, and laborers hired. Because it was associated with such payments, latter Lammas became a humorous phrase for a day which is indefinitely delayed, or never, as in these wonderful Oxford English Dictionary citations. So, and then here's just a couple, right? So many writers draw their sentences in length and make an end at latter Lammas, which is to say their sentences are really long, they never end. Right? This is the cause, believe me now, my lord, that courtiers thrive at a latter Lammas day. they never thrive, right? This your will at latter Lammas will fulfill, so it's never going to be filled. The very expectation of them puts me in mind of never, right? This convocation was somewhat unbecomingly postponed to never latter Lammas, right? So you get the idea. Humorous. I'd actually never really been aware of this one at all until reading Parker's article, which will be linked down below, of course. And she does have actually a chapter, a section on I think in chapter 10 in Winters in the World, which I didn't actually look at this time, but she does talk about Lammas in that book as well. And then we have the last thing, Lammas leaves, which actually doesn't happen where I live because I do not live in a temperate region. But it's actually a season for around this time period, right? Which is why it's called Lammas leaves, right? For renewed growth, again in temperate regions, and where new shoots are produced or second shoots are produced separate from spring growth. And so I think Eleanor Parker, I believe, also points out that this is a rather poetic sense. And so this is my picture, actually. And the bread picture before was my wife's picture. But this is a picture I took just last week, actually. So it felt appropriate. That is on the banks of a river, actually. But so anyways, that's a little bit about Lammas, which is, funnily enough, not a lot about Lammas because there's not a lot out there. I did think, being one of those more interestingly named English festivals, that it deserves some more attention. And even though we don't know much about it, I think that's one of the interesting things about it. So maybe I'll bake a loaf of bread today, but I'm not sure what else. So anyways, thank you for watching. I hope this helped you in some ways. Happy Lammas.